Hello, and welcome to Open Doors Metropolitan Community Church from wherever or whenever you are. We are a community seeking to live out the radically inclusive love of Jesus the Christ. We are part of two faith groups, the Progressive Christian Alliance and Metropolitan Community Churches. We invite you now to join us for excerpts from our service held on Sunday, September 10th, 2017. We continue in our series on creation, since this is the season of creation which we are observing, and the theme of our service today is Ill Fares the Land. Presiding and preaching is the Reverend Craig Bartlett.
The first lesson comes from the book of Genesis, selected sections from chapters 3 and 4. Kind of a long section, so I'm going to invite, as is our custom, we invite people to read as they're moved. If you'd like to, one person would like to take the chapter 3 section and someone would like to take the chapter 4 section. Who'd like to go first? Okay, all right. And you can, actually, I'll let you do, you'd like to do chapter 4, okay? Sure. Okay, good. We're covered.
They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening. The man and his wife hid themselves in the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" He said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." He said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate it." The Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent tricked me, and I ate." The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." To the woman he said, "I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." And to the man he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree about which I have commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. It is told, you shall not eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field."
Now the man knew that his wife Eve, who had conceived before Cain, saying, "I have produced man in the house of the Lord." Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel for his part brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portion. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering he made no regard. For Cain was very angry, and his confidence fell. The Lord said to the Lord, we're getting there. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why are your confidence fallen? If you do no well, you will not be accepted. If you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Desire is this for you, but you must master it." Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He till the ground. You will no longer be able to strength. You'll be a fugitive and a wanderer on earth.
The Gospel comes from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 12, the 38th to the 40th verses. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you." But he answered them, "An evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so for 3 days and 3 nights the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth." God, may I never lightly presume to preach your word, and may we never lightly presume to hear it. For your word is light and life. We're trying a little experiment this morning, for those of you who are here, who are maybe watching us online. We're trying our translation equipment out, so we've got some people, we've got somebody who is trying out the translation, so see, and we've got someone reading a Korean version of the sermon that I'm preaching today. Hopefully, this will work. Ill fares the land, to hastening ills of prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. This quote comes from the Oliver Goldsmith poem, The Deserted Village. It describes a formerly quaint country village, a place where people lived, worked, and played, didn't get rich, but had enough. In the poet's vision, though, it's now a wasteland. One of many villages left at that time, deserted so that people could take part in what became the first industrial revolution. Goldsmith wrote against the desire for accumulation of wealth, rooted, as he saw it, in plain old greed. The desire for more. The desire for more. To have power. To be in authority. To have things and people at your disposal and under your control. The desire to be God. This is one possible definition of what we traditionally call sin.
Okay.
And it can explain a lot. Now, even though these days we generally view the creation stories of Genesis as stories, and not as lessons in geology or physics, biology or archaeology, we still find much truth. We find a word from God in them. And as I read them this week, I could almost hear the questions lurking behind these stories of the serpent and the initial disobedience of the first humans and the first murder. relationships between men and women, and between members of the family, the way they are.
왜 그렇게 될까요?
Why is childbearing the trial
그
that
자체가
it
어려운
is?
과정일까요?
And why is it so damn hard sometimes to get something to grow out of the ground?
힘든 일입니까?
As I read these lessons, I could hear these questions in my mind.
죄의 기원에 대한
And
설명으로
traditionally, these stories are interpreted as explanations for the origin of sin. Now, I'm going to be honest and say something which some of you may find shocking.
저는 여러분들에게 충격을 받은 솔직한
I find most traditional definitions and explanations of sin
저는
to be
전통적인 죄에 대한
useless.
정의와 설명이 쓸모없다고 생각합니다.
Useless. Breaking God's laws, commandments, rebelling against, disobeying God, going against God's intentions. I'll be honest, those
하나님의
traditional definitions don't hold much meaning for me.
저에게 그 의미들은 별로 중요하지
They simply don't. However, these days,
요즘에는
I find the definition offered by Paul Tillich
폴트로기 전이라
to be much more fulfilling. And I quote, "Sin is separation.
죄는 개인의 생각에서
Separation among individual lives, separation of humans from themselves, and separation of all humans from the ground of being.
존재의 땅으로부터의 좁힘이
And we know that we are separated.
우리는 우리가 분리되어 있습니다.
We not only suffer with all other creatures because of the self-destructive consequences of our separation, but we also know why we suffer. We know that we are estranged from something to which we really belong and with which we should be united. I'd like to suggest to you today that this idea of separation from the ground of being is something more than just something symbolic. And for this, we could use a little lesson from evolutionary science. Let's go back about 2 billion years, when the only things which existed on this evolving planet were bacteria and blue-green algae. At that time, it's believed that levels of carbon dioxide began to decrease, oxygen levels increased, and formations emerged in soil, in shallow water deposits, and in rivers, where iron combined with this oxygen to form red iron oxide. And from this red iron oxide came the life which has become part of the planet. The insects, the trees, the bushes, the leaves, the ground, everything that comes from it, animals, and us. The land can never really belong to us because in a very real sense, the land is us. Indigenous cultures from around the world have never lost touch with this. But somehow, yeah, and we knew this as well. We do this in our cultures as well, but somewhere along the line, we became separated from the land. We saw it as something alien to us, something separate from us. And then we began to think, and with that in mind, we began to think that we could take from earth whatever we wanted. And this idea was expressed in its extreme form by Francis Bacon when he wrote, "We must torture Mother Earth for her secrets." And I believe these days it's expressed in the idea which you find in many conservative economic circles, that the only value that the earth has is the economic value, the money value, the dollar sign that you can place on its resources. So, when we desire to control others, when we desire to control the earth and its resources, herein comes the point where we are separated from the ground, literally from the ground of our being. Now, of course, that does not mean that we were never meant to use, that doesn't mean that we never use the resources of the planet. There is no injunction against using the resources of the earth for our benefit. But when we treat the earth as a dead, inert thing, totally different from us, for us to exploit and manipulate for our wealth and our opulence, then we can say we are separated from the ground of being. And from there, I think is a much better understanding of what it means to say that we're in a state of sin. In this situation, perhaps we can understand the mission of Jesus then as overcoming that separation from the ground of being, from the source of life from which we all depend. And that we can live again as people who are aware of our dependence on the planet and each other for our lives. If we look at the basic pattern of the ministry of Jesus, we see someone who freely taught, who freely healed, and then willingly depended on his hosts for their hospitality. And this was the model that he expected from those whom he sent out to minister to others. The early Christian communities modeled this mutual independence and this support for each other. The foundational Christian prayer, the Our Father, the Jesus prayer, the Lord's Prayer, whatever you want to call it. It asks that we may receive daily bread, the resources we need for each day. It does not ask for wealth or opulence. It simply asks that we may have enough
충분한 것이 없습니다.
for each day. I believe this is a model for life which reconnects us
이것은
with
우리를
what really matters.
연결시키는 삶의 모델입니다.
Of course, this goes head to head against the powers that be.
이것은 권력에 대해서
And forces of power, we now call the forces of empire, have always done their best to kill off these ideas. Sometimes there's been active persecution, as
산속이
what happened throughout the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. And about 100 years later, they found that Rome decided that they couldn't beat the Jesus movement, so they co-opted it. They incorporated it into the Roman power system and made it first a tolerated religion and then the state religion. In the 1980s, military governments in Central America, with help from American benefactors, including evangelical and fundamentalist churches, managed to pretty well kill off the liberation theology movement. The liberation theology movement was all based around what was called base communities, where groups of poor people met in the slums and in the barrios and in the favelas, and they talked about what the gospel meant to them in daily, practical terms. The forces of empire are all too willing to rip us away from our connection to the ground of being, again and again. In spite of this, because we remember our connection to the ground of being, because we remember our connection to the red earth from which we come, the desire to overcome our separation from it continues. This connection, it refuses to die. The knowledge of this connection refuses to die. It has lived in the movements of social reformers who have fought for living wages, for education available to all. It has lived in the movements led by those who campaigned for and who still campaign for equal rights and treatment under the law, regardless of ethnicity, sexuality, and identity. It lives in the lives of those who have joined together in communities where they seek to live simpler, less complicated lives. These are not deluded dreamers, lost in some kind of impractical idealism. They have kept alive the connection with the ground of being that we're all meant to have. And so, just like the story of Jonah, who spent 3 days in the belly of the great fish, Christ of our universe goes back into the very essence of the earth. And he resides in the darkness. And he emerges triumphant, showing us how life is meant to be. Jesus, whom we call the Christ, is the new Adam, the new earthling, the new red earth one. He shows us the way back to the land, to the earth, to the very ground
집,
of our being.
우리 존재에
May we all have the courage to follow.
모두가 바로 따라갈 수 있는
Amen.
We've enjoyed sharing these worship excerpts with you, and we hope you'll find them helpful in your prayer and devotional life. Better yet, we hope you'll join us in our work and our ministry. All are welcome to join us. Age, race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity are no barrier to joining us in our work and our ministry. This is what we mean by radically inclusive. We hope you'll join us in our new location at Space L in Myeodong, Gangbuk-gu in Seoul. Want to find out how to get there or get more information? Please check out our website at www.opendooorskorea.org. We hope to see you soon.